The wind howled across the open plains that night, carrying sheets of snow that buried everything in white. The winter storm came sudden, cruel, and loud. Most folks in the valley had shut their doors tight before sundown, knowing the wind would cut through bone if given the chance. But one house stood apart on the edge of the woods where a soft light flickered behind frosted windows. Inside, a woman named Mary sat near the small fire, wrapped in a heavy wool blanket, listening to the storm roar like a wild beast outside. She had lived alone since her husband died 2 winters ago. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and most folks in town barely spoke to her after what had happened between her husband and a local man named Elijah Gray, a man from the tribe they called their enemy. Her husband had fought in border skirmishes years ago, and he carried that hatred till his death. But Mary had only ever seen pain in those fights, pain that didn't end even after victory. That night, as she stirred the fire and listened to the wind, she thought of how quiet the world became in winter, how easy it was to feel forgotten. The snow piled higher against the door, and the wood creaked with the cold. She was used to silence. She liked silence. It felt safe. But then, as the clock ticked past midnight, she heard it. A faint knock. Slow, uneven. Then again, Mary froze. No one should be out in a storm like this. She waited, thinking maybe the wind had fooled her. Then came the third knock, heavier this time, followed by a muffled voice that broke through the storm. It sounded weak, almost desperate. She hesitated only a moment before lighting her lantern and walking to the door. When she opened it, the freezing air hit her like a slap. Snow rushed in, and in its swirl she saw a figure collapsing against her porch, covered in frost, bleeding from the shoulder, his face half hidden by a torn scarf. "Help, please," the man whispered before falling to his knees. Mary pulled him inside without thinking. She dragged him to the fire, the lantern trembling in her hand as she set it down. The man's coat was torn, soaked with blood. When she peeled it back, she saw a mark burned into the leather, one she recognized. It was the same symbol her husband used to curse whenever he saw it carved on trees or worn on belts. This man wasn't just a stranger. He was one of them. Her breath caught. The storm outside wailed louder, as if warning her. She stared at the man's pale face, his long dark hair frozen stiff, his lips blue. She knew what the town would say if they found out. "You let an enemy into your home. You'll pay for it. They don't deserve mercy." But as she watched him tremble, close to death, something deep in her heart wouldn't let her walk away. She heated water, tore strips from an old sheet, and cleaned his wound. He didn't wake for hours. She worked in silence, her hands steady though her mind spun with doubt. She remembered her husband's words years ago. Never trust them. They'd leave you to die without blinking. Maybe that had been true for some, maybe not for all. By morning, the storm had not eased. Snow piled halfway up her windows. The man lay still on the floor by the fire, his breathing shallow but steady. Mary sat in her chair watching him, sipping broth she barely tasted. She thought of the time her husband had been lost in a blizzard and how she'd prayed for someone, anyone, to find him. Maybe this was her answer. Not for him, but for her own heart. Around noon, the man stirred. He blinked weakly, trying to sit up. Mary leaned forward, steadying him with a hand. "You're safe," she said softly. "Don't move too much." His eyes darted around the room, cautious, confused. "Why, you help me?" he asked, his accent thick but clear. She hesitated before answering. "Because no one deserves to die in the snow." He stared at her as if not believing. His gaze shifted to the small cross hanging above her fireplace. Maybe he understood something in that moment because he lowered his eyes and whispered, "Thank you." His name was Elijah. When she heard it, her heart skipped. That Elijah, the same one from the stories told in town, the man her husband once swore to kill for what happened at the border years ago. She didn't speak the thought aloud. She only nodded and brought him broth, helping him drink. His hands shook from cold, but when he looked at her, there was no hate, only exhaustion. Days passed before the storm broke. During those days, the small cabin became its own world. Mary changed his bandages, shared her food, and listened quietly as he spoke in low, tired tones about how he'd been attacked while trying to reach his people across the ridge. His horse had fallen, and he'd walked miles through the storm before finding her light. She said little in return, though her heart softened with each word. She began to see not an enemy, but a man who had known as much loss as she had. He told her he had once had a wife, lost to sickness the same winter her husband died. He said he still heard her voice when the wind blew through the trees. Mary nodded. She understood that kind of silence. On the 4th day, the sun came out. Snow glittered like glass across the fields. She stepped outside to fetch water from the frozen barrel and saw tracks, boot prints half buried by snow heading toward her home. Her heart jumped. Only one kind of visitor came uninvited this far. Before she could think, voices echoed down the trail. Men from town. They were armed and loud, their laughter carrying across the cold air. She ran back inside. Elijah was standing weakly by the fire, his bandaged arm hanging limp. "They can't see you here," she said quickly. He frowned. "They'll kill me." She looked at the window, then back at him. "Hide in the root cellar now." He didn't argue. He moved, slow but steady, disappearing beneath the trap door by the stove. She covered it with a rug and tried to calm her breath. Moments later, the door banged open. "Mary," a man called. It was Sheriff Clark, followed by two others. Snow clung to their coats. "You all right out here?" She nodded. "Just fine. Storm kept me busy." They looked around suspiciously. "We're tracking one of them," the sheriff said. "Heard he came this way. Dangerous man. You ain't seen anyone, have you?" Mary shook her head. "No one. Just the wind." The men lingered, stamping their boots, looking over the place. One of them peered toward the fire, sniffing. "You sure? Smell like smoke and herbs. You ain't hiding someone, are you?" She met his gaze without flinching. "If I were, you'd see them, wouldn't you?" They laughed lightly, uneasy. After a moment, the sheriff tipped his hat. "All right, ma'am, stay safe. If you see tracks again, you tell us," she nodded, heart pounding. When they finally left, she locked the door, her hands shaking. She waited until the sound of their horses faded before she lifted the rug and opened the trap door. Elijah climbed out slowly, his face pale, but his eyes bright with gratitude. "You risked your life," he said quietly. She shook her head. "No, just did what was right." He smiled faintly. "No one else would have." For a long time they stood there, the firelight soft on their faces, the world outside silent under snow. Neither spoke more, but something unspoken passed between them, something that melted the ice that years of hate had built. And though Mary didn't know it yet, what she did that night would change not only her life but the way the whole town saw the meaning of mercy. The storm had passed, but the snow still glistened across the valley like a sea of glass. Mary stepped out the next morning, her boots crunching softly as the sun broke through the clouds. The air was quiet now, too quiet after the wild wind that had screamed for days. She breathed deeply, her heart still heavy from the fear of last night. Inside the cabin, Elijah sat near the fire, his wounded arm resting on his lap. The color had returned to his face, and though he was still weak, his eyes had a calm strength in them now. He looked at her when she entered, and there was something different in his gaze. A quiet respect and something softer too, like understanding. "They gone?" he asked. Mary nodded. "For now. But they'll be back. Folks around here don't forgive easy." Elijah lowered his head. "I should leave before I bring you trouble." But she shook her head. "You can't walk far with that wound. And the roads are still buried." She poured him warm tea and set it in front of him. "When the snow melts, then you can go. Till then, you're safe here." For a while, neither spoke. Only the crackle of fire filled the room. Mary sat down with her sewing and tried not to notice how quiet he had become. Every now and then, he looked toward the window as if measuring the distance to the mountains beyond. She could tell he longed for home, for his people, for a place where he didn't have to look over his shoulder. Days turned into weeks. The snow began to melt slowly, and water dripped from the roof like tears. During that time, something gentle grew between them, not spoken, not planned. It came in small moments. When Mary laughed softly at something he said, when he helped mend a broken chair even with his weak arm, when they sat side by side listening to the wind, not as strangers but as people who had both lost something precious. One evening, she found him outside, standing by the old fence that her husband had built. The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the snow gold. Elijah's hair moved in the cold wind and his eyes were far away. "You shouldn't be out here long," she said, walking up beside him. "I wanted to remember the way it looks," he said quietly. "It's peaceful here. My home's not far, but I can't go back the same man." She looked at him, puzzled. "Why?" He smiled faintly. "Because I came to hate and I found kindness instead." His words stayed with her long after they went back inside. One morning, a week later, she heard the sound of horses again. She froze, her hands trembling as she set down the pot she was carrying. Elijah met her eyes, knowing instantly what it meant. "They've come again," he said. She looked out the window. 5 riders approached through the snow, their coats heavy, their rifles slung over their shoulders. The sheriff rode in front. Her heart pounded. She had hoped they wouldn't return so soon. "You need to hide," she whispered. Elijah shook his head this time. "No more hiding. I'll go. They'll kill you." He smiled gently. "Maybe, but I won't let them bring harm to you. You gave me life. I can't let them take yours for it." Mary stepped closer, gripping his arm. There must be another way. But the knock came before she could say more, sharp, heavy, and impatient. She looked toward the door, her pulse racing. The sheriff's voice echoed through the wood. "Mary, we need to talk. Open up." When she opened the door, the sheriff's cold eyes met hers. "Morning, ma'am," he said. "You look pale. Everything all right?" "Just tired," she replied quietly. He glanced past her shoulder. "We've got word the man we were hunting's still alive. Some tracks lead right near your place again. You sure you haven't seen him?" Her throat went dry. Before she could speak, Elijah stepped forward from behind her. "I'm the man you're looking for," he said calmly. The sheriff's hand went straight to his gun. The other men tensed. Mary gasped. "Don't shoot!" she cried, stepping in front of Elijah. "Please listen to me." "Get out the way, Mary," the sheriff said sharply. "You don't know what you're protecting." "I know exactly what I'm protecting," she said firmly. "He's hurt, weak, and he would have died if I hadn't helped. He's no danger to anyone." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "He's one of them. They raided a caravan near the border last year. Killed men from this town." Elijah's voice was low but steady. "I wasn't there. I lost family too. The snow don't care who it kills, white or red." The sheriff hesitated. His men looked uneasy, shifting in their saddles. Mary stepped closer to Elijah, her hand still raised as if shielding him. "Please," she said softly. "Let him go. If you hang him, what good will it do? It won't bring anyone back. It'll just bring more hate." The sheriff's face was hard as stone. "You can't change what's been done." "No," she said. "But I can change what comes next." For a long moment, no one spoke. Only the sound of melting snow dripping from the roof filled the silence. Then the sheriff lowered his gun slightly. "Fine," he muttered. "But if he's still here by tomorrow, I'll bring a warrant." They turned their horses and rode away, leaving the air thick with tension. Mary let out the breath she'd been holding. Elijah looked at her, disbelief in his eyes. "You risked everything," he said. She smiled faintly. "You did the same for me." That night, neither of them slept. The fire burned low, throwing long shadows on the walls. Elijah sat near the window, staring at the moonlit snow. "I should leave now," he said at last. "Before morning." Mary looked up. "It's dark. You'll freeze. Better that than seeing them hurt you because of me." She rose slowly, her voice trembling. "You think they won't come for me anyway? I saved you. They'll call me a traitor." He turned to her then, his face filled with sorrow. "Then why did you do it?" She took a long breath, her eyes glistening in the firelight. "Because when I opened that door and saw you dying in the snow, I saw my husband. He died out there once alone. No one helped him. I couldn't let that happen again, not to anyone." Elijah stood silent. Then he bowed his head. "Your heart is stronger than any storm, Mary." Before dawn, he saddled a half-broken horse from her shed. The snow had softened enough for travel. Mary stood in the doorway, her shawl wrapped tight around her. "Where will you go?" she asked quietly. "Home," he said. "But not the same home I left. Maybe one day I'll come back and no one will call us enemies." She smiled faintly. "I'd like that." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small carving. A bird made of dark wood, smooth and shining. "My wife made this once," he said. "Keep it. For peace." She took it gently, her fingers trembling. "Thank you." He nodded, mounted the horse, and turned toward the valley. She watched him disappear into the pale light of morning, his figure growing smaller until the snow swallowed him. For days after, the town whispered. Word spread that Mary had sheltered the enemy. Some called her foolish, others brave. But when the sheriff came again, he said nothing. He only tipped his hat and left a small bag of flour by her door, as if to say he understood more than words could tell. Spring came slowly that year. The snow melted and wildflowers bloomed on the edge of her fence. Sometimes, at dusk, she'd stand outside watching the hills, thinking of the man who'd walked into her home half dead and left with her faith restored. Months later, a rider came from the north and a trader passing through. He stopped at her gate and said, "You're the woman who saved the stranger in the storm?" She nodded carefully. The man smiled. "Then you should know something." "That stranger?" He brought your name to his people. Said a woman of mercy lives by the river woods. They call you the White Dove now. He told them hate don't melt snow, kindness does. Mary stood still, her eyes wet, her heart full. She looked toward the horizon where the hills met the sky and whispered a silent prayer of thanks. And from that day on, folks said her house was never without light on winter nights. A lamp always burning by the window for anyone lost in the storm.